is Daphne Rabinovich, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to tonight's book club, our 10th this year. Please make sure to have your Zoom on a side-by-side view for the best possible experience. And I am so excited to introduce you to our interviewer tonight, Megan Gail Coles. Megan is a graduate of the Memorial University of Newfoundland and the National Theatre School of Canada, and is still completing, is that true? An MFA at the university. No, okay, we'll just leave that one out. But she has completed numerous plays, and her first collection of short stories, Eating Habits of the Chronically Lonesome, won the BMO Winterset Award, the Relit Award, and the Margaret and John Savage First Book Award, and earned her also the one-time Writers Trust 5x5 Prize. Small Game Hunting at the local Coward Gun Club, her first novel, was shortlisted for the 2019 Scotiabank Giller Prize. She was also one of our juror members in 2020 or 2021. Originally from Savage Coast on the Great Northern Peninsula of Newfoundland, Megan now resides in St. John's, where she is a new mom, and she is the executive director of Riddle Fence and projects manager at Eastern Edge Gallery. Tonight, Megan will be interviewing Aimee Wall, author of the novel Wee Jane, which was longlisted for the 2021 Scotiabank Giller Prize. Please feel free to submit your questions at the bottom, of the screen, and Megan will look for those at about 7:45. So I don't want to waste any more of your time. Please join me in welcoming Megan and Aimee.
Hi. I feel like I'm cursed by the outdated bio, but I should say that I'm not a MFA school dropout. I did complete my master's, but that's not what we're here to talk about this evening. I'm really pleased to introduce everyone to Aimee Wall, Newfoundland native. She's a writer and translator. Her essays, short fiction, and criticism have appeared in numerous publications, including Maisonneuve, Matrix Magazine, the Montreal Review of Books, and Lemonhound. Wall's translations include Vicky Gendreau, is that how you pronounce that? Vicky Gendreau's novel Testament, and Drama Queens, and Sports and Pastimes by Jean-Philippe Berrier-Gerard. I massacred that one, but it's okay. She lives in Montreal. Wee Jane is her first novel. Welcome, Aimee.
Thank you, Megan. Thanks
So
to do this with you.
Yeah, it's really nice. We don't get this opportunity to talk about books so formally anymore, now that you are currently in La Belle Provence and I'm back home in Newfoundland. I had the great honor of being on the jury for which your book was longlisted. So I'm clearly like a great fan of your work. And so it's really exciting for me to get to be the person to interview you for this book club. And we're just gonna jump right in there because an hour is not really a lot of time. And so before we get started, I would ask you to give us a reading from your novel, please.
Sure, yeah. So I'm going to read like a short little chapter from basically the very beginning of the book. It's chapter 2. One night in the early fall days after Carl's departure, after their breakup really, though he had somehow managed to skip the part where he actually had to break up with her by simply informing her that he had bought a one-way ticket home to his country and would not be returning, Martha had gone to an outdoor film screening in Cabot Square. She'd gone alone, joining a crowd of mostly women sitting on blankets and little folding chairs at one end of the park, its usual occupants crowded out down into the other end. The film was a documentary about a Dutch doctor who traveled by boat to countries where abortion was illegal, picking up women and administering the abortion pill to them on board, back out in international waters. They went to Ecuador and unfurled a banner off the Virgin of El Penicio with a number to a hotline that would give instructions on inducing a miscarriage. It was all more spectacle than practical, really. It was media attention, the ship a galvanizing force for frenzied activists on both sides. But they were doing something. Martha had heard about the ship before, but hadn't known they were using the pill. She had been imagining a kind of miniature surgical theater on board something that turned out to be the size of a crab boat. Really, the doctor was just there to monitor women who took a pill, illegal in their countries, that made them bleed, adjust their blanket around their shoulders, all that fuss for that. Partway through the film, Martha noticed a man standing just to the side of the screen, facing the wrong way. He had dark circles under his eyes, an otherwise pasty white face, a shaved head, camo pants, and a scruffy black backpack, one hand on the handlebars of a beater bicycle. He was surveying the crowd. Martha drew her knees tighter to her chest. The pigeons flustered around his feet, and he was motionless, scowling. She tried to return her attention to the screen, where a mob of similarly twisted white male faces were spitting mad screaming at the little crab boat as it tried to dock in Poland. But the man remained at his station, just to the left of her peripheral vision. At a crescendo in the film, as the women on board tried to dock the boat, tried to find some way through the angry mass on shore, the man suddenly wrenched the backpack off his back and threw it to the ground, and Martha flinched, ducked her head, but nothing happened. He put one foot on the bag and kept scowling theatrically, and the woman next to Martha thrust her chin in the man's direction and then shook her head, and Martha relaxed slightly, smiled at her, shook her own head at herself. They were in Montreal. It was not likely. When the film ended, a woman got up with a microphone to introduce someone connected with the boat doctor, and the crowd thinned quickly. Those remaining, Martha among them, slid a little closer. There was a dampening Q&A, a lot of fired up audience members wondering how they could join up, as if it were a Navy fleet, and the guest speaker smilingly shrugging that there was no real way to join up or work with this particular group, apart from giving them money and attention. It wasn't a fleet. Martha wished they at least had ambitions of a fleet, something. The crowd stirred and mumbled. It was starting to turn. Martha was itching again. The women felt like she did, maybe. It had been 2 years, but Martha was still angry at the indignity of it all, at the insistence of the physical body. She wanted there to be a fight about it. She wanted to join up, but there was nothing to join. I'll stop there.
And so this section that you just read from comes just prior to Martha meeting, if there's such a word, her antagonist, so to speak. Though that is like really oversimplifying the relationship that these two people share throughout the novel. And so I would like to start our book club session by talking about this relationship specifically, and how the dynamics really informed the plot, but also the character development in the book. And so my first question, it's a combination of like observation and question, is there's a clear power imbalance within Martha and Ruth's relationship that seems to go beyond like just your typical intergenerational and friendship situation. And I'm wondering how Ruth's imperviousness to Martha's like request for information regarding what they're about to set out into doing, how that impacts Martha's struggle for self-determination and body autonomy. And I thought it was interesting that even in the very first meeting, or one of the first times that they are alone together, you set it up in such a way that there's a real tension in this relationship, but even some fear, apprehension on Martha's part. Like when they're in the car, the driving is such that she feels unsafe to the point where she braces herself. And so this really clearly outlines like how that relationship moves and evolves through the book. Can you speak to how that, what your intentions were craft-wise, and how that lent itself to story development and character development?
Yeah, sure. That relationship was kind of like central to my ideas around the book from the very beginning. Like I had these two women together from the start before I had really fleshed out where I was going with it. And I've also actually found that the way people react to that relationship is one of the most interesting things I find in hearing from people, because people react quite differently to it. People really read it differently, and it's really interesting to hear. So yeah, like I had started out thinking about the kind of relationship that ensues when like one person has the other person on a pedestal. Like Martha meets this person and doesn't even call her by her real name at first. Like she has her kind of up on this pedestal as this kind of like mythical figure, and is letting all this other stuff go a little bit. Like she's chalking it up to like mystery or something. She's kind of along for the ride. And I was interested in what happens when like inevitably this person is going to fall from this pedestal, or like the scales will fall from Martha's eyes. This is going to be a real person that she's gone on a road trip with, and like what happens after that, what happens to that relationship. And like I think my first ideas about it were actually like a little more, we're not quite as dark as how it kind of ended up turning out. In the power imbalance kind of became a little more dramatic, I think, as I went along. But like the other side of it, I guess, the other thing that I had been thinking about was the kind of like complicated relationships of people working together outside of like an institution or something that imposes a structure or a hierarchy, when you're supposed to be like an egalitarian collective, but inevitably that's not the case. Inevitably somebody, takes the lead. I read this book. I did like a fair bit of research just to like think about different things. And I read this book by Alice Eccles called Daring to be Bad, that like kind of charts the like birth and eventual disintegration of all of these radical feminist groups in New York in the 70s. And you see like kind of patterns of what happens. And it's not to say that it's women that do this in groups, it's people, but in this case, this is what we were talking about. And then, even more specifically, the actual Jane Collective, there was this kind of siloing of information that happened within the group, wherein like some of the women who had learned to perform abortions, they had more information and they had more knowledge. And then there were these other women who, they focus more on like organizing or the administrative aspects of this. There's a lot of phone calls involved in this. And, in the book I read, it was like by a former member who interviewed all these other former members. And, many people mentioned a kind of growing tension or resentment around like who knew what. Part of that had to do with like risk and safety, but, it inevitably creates these like divides. And not to say I was mapping that like literally onto Martha and Ruth. I think it was kind of more unconscious, the mirroring of these dynamics. But yeah, like I kind of thought about Martha's like journey as a character as being one of like, when is she going to stand up to this person?
But like when they first meet, Martha, you could argue, is in a very vulnerable position. She's like a little bit lost. Her relationship has ended quite undramatically, in that her partner has just unceremoniously like left her, like not just left her, left the country. Like there's no even attempts at reconciliation. There can be no reconciliation. And so she seems to be searching for something, some purpose, right? Like there's this very a very self-aware kind of admission of Martha's that she would like to have some greater purpose than the current employment or kind of the day-to-day that she's living. And so I wonder how that has made not Ruth predatory, but she's very aware of this factor. She seems to, in some ways, I don't know if exploit is the right word, but there's definitely like she's cognizant that this person looks up to her and has a desire to make something meaningful of their time together. And I found it really like interesting in that, like sure, there's a risk factor and there's an access to information, but Ruth like dismisses
Mhm.
Martha's like concerns, won't ask basic questions, calls and demands time on the telephone, which I thought was very interesting. Like this is a clear um something that I associate with an entirely different person, like this kind of like demanding behavior. And so I wonder if there was intention there. Like she's not a villain, but she's certainly not like your stereotypical hero character, or nor is she an anti-hero character, Ruth, I mean. And so how does the flawed individual communicate something different to the reader?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, yeah, like I wanted her to be flawed in these kind of like not pedestrian, but kind of like, she isn't like a villain. She doesn't, her flaw is that she's kind of like, she's a bit flaky. She's kind of imperious. She like relishes that role that she has assumed with Martha. Um, sometimes she's just kind of like an asshole. Like it's kind of, it's not like serious anti-hero stuff. And I kind of liked that because I didn't think that there was no way back for her or for her and Martha. Like I liked the idea that they would have some kind of like reckoning, or that Martha would kind of recognize this for what it is, but that they wouldn't be unable to. I mean, it's kind of left a bit ambiguous at the end, like what happens with their relationship, but um, I didn't want it to be like there's no way back from this. Like this is so entrenched a toxic dynamic that we can't fix it. I kind of wanted it to be like, maybe Ruth can like relax a little bit herself, or like recognize her own behavior. I didn't want her to be irredeemable, I guess. Um, and maybe that was in part because like I think sometimes I was kind of hard on Martha in my mind. Like I was kind of like, well, she needs to recognize this, like she has made this person into a character, and now she has to reckon with her being a person. Um, so the flaws are like on that level of that it would be possible to reckon with, or that it wouldn't be inadvisable, maybe. I don't know.
There's like, even in saying that, and I don't think Ruth is unredeemable. I do think redemption is possible for this character in whatever like realm that like if we were to like read on how that would progress. But there's still like some alienation that happens like
Mm.
with Martha. Like when you think about how Ruth responds to Martha having contact with other women, or how belittling she is if Martha has any contact with any male characters in the book. Like she almost any body needs that Martha expresses, like whether it's romantic desire or loneliness or anything, is really like shot down almost immediately. So she's made to feel ashamed of herself for wanting
Mm.
like anything else. And I wonder when you're talking more, applying that to the context of the narrative, whereby
Mhm.
there's a lot of body shaming that comes into play and body autonomy and self-determination. I found it very interesting that inside of this like relationship, you have so little of the same rights and freedoms that the movement is supposed to be trying to like acquire for women. Like Martha doesn't have any of the ownership of her um, journey or her like intention inside of the narrative while they are talking, pontificating about helping women acquire this. And so that was an interesting juxtaposition for me as a reader.
Mhm. Yeah, I did it. And like, that's actually not something I like super consciously set out to set up against each other. At least not that like specifically. Like I was thinking about how sometimes I think um, someone like Martha in this position on at both, like at once she firmly believes in what they're doing and is on board with this like mission, and on the other hand she just wants something to do. Like she wants like a purpose. She wants to belong to this, to something, you know, she wants to like make a little family kind of. And so like the motivation is like both of these things at once. It's not only that like I am a completely self-determined person and now I shall go and pursue these good works. It's like she's still in the middle of her own stuff, and all of their like motivations for doing this work aren't solely, you know, this one.
Altruistic.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so there's like a fusion of identity that's happening with Martha. Like she's becomes and you do this when you're using like the third person, like the distance that's present in how we see Martha and what Martha knows and what the reader knows. We see how the project and Martha become sometimes occasionally overlapping, like almost like one and the same. And so I guess how coherent or how intentional were you when you were setting that out? Like there are other interlopers, we'll call them, characters that like come into play. And were you actively trying to keep them as outsiders in the story? Jenny, for example, serves a really interesting purpose in the novel. Can you speak to how Jenny what Jenny means to Ruth and Martha and how she is different than the other characters?
Yeah, it's funny, I feel like I never end up talking about her in these like situations, but she does like serve a really specific purpose. And she kind of is more of like an interloper than anybody else is. She's American. She kind of shows up. It doesn't seem like, well, Ruth and Martha neither are super thrilled to see her for different reasons. I mean, I always thought of like her, like Ruth and her are kind of jostling for position. Like I think they've always been competitive. They're kind of on the level, and Ruth is like, well, you know, like I don't want this person to come and like take over my space or interfere with my relationship with Trish. But for Martha, there's this other side of it, which is that if Jenny is there as this kind of outsider, then maybe people are going to notice that she's kind of on the outside a little bit too, that she's from there, but she's moved away and now she's home, and she's kind of self-conscious about being grouped with Jenny versus being grouped with the people in the community. Like at the card game, she's kind of like, I'm not with you. I'm of this place. But obviously she feels self-conscious about it if she's even thinking this, you know, it kind of like highlights something she doesn't really want to look at. But, you know, she's curious about her too. She like represents something else. She represents a different world. And like another set of motivations for doing this kind of work, and like another like, you know, relationship with like feminism or with organizing that comes from this kind of different place. So yeah, like I liked the idea of bringing her in to kind of shake them all up a little bit.
I mean, it is interesting that the outsider character is American, given how hotly debated the topic of access to abortion and reproductive rights is constantly like covered, not just here in Canada, but specifically in America. We've seen things occur recently that many people, myself included, would consider very regressive and oppressive. Like, and so I'm wondering, did you, when you first started conceiving the book, did you have a premonition? Did you see that things were potentially like moving in this direction? It's very timely, unfortunately, that this is the novel we're speaking about, just as the access to abortion in a lot of states are really like limited, if not like unattainable completely. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I started writing this in 2015. And it, you know, at first, in the very first months and weeks of working on it, I kind of thought, is there like, am I reaching here kind of? like, are we okay on this front? And then inevitably there was just like this cyclical, like twice a year, there will be something in the news, whether it was in some part of Canada, whether it was like the referendum in Ireland, inevitably something in the States, and it just kind of comes back around and around again. And I think especially when we have these like backwards movements in the States, there's like a bit of the reaction in Canada can go one of two ways. One is to be scared for our own situation, kind of not maybe sometimes with the full understanding that like we don't really have the same law structure around this. Like it wouldn't happen in the same way here as there. But then the other reaction is this, like, as often with the States, this little bit of like smugness, like this little bit of like kind of complacency of like, well, it's better here. At least it's not like that here. And that always kind of makes me crazy because, we have massive problems with this here. It's just not as flashy because it's not as the Supreme Court or something. So yeah, go ahead.
That's what I was, part of my questioning is, we do see this reaction to some of these archaic decisions in the United States bring out a level of like self-congratulation across Canada that I think is really unwarranted, given that most women in rural parts of the country have little to no access to abortion, and they would be financially like impossible, in fact, for them to access an abortion in the like traditional medical sense of the word. And so how did this impact, how did this like we both know that Newfoundland and Labrador especially is a very sparsely populated place, and so there are people living really quite far from any kind of reproductive center or clinic. And so how did this inform the writing of the novel for you?
It was like once I thought about writing about this at all, I knew I was going home with it. Like it's something I had always thought about when I lived there. And then when you live in a larger place and you get a sense of how different it is to be in a place where there are clinics, people could just get on the metro and go to a clinic here. And you contrast that with somebody who has to figure out a ride, and then what are they doing with the kids? And like, it does this, it makes it a whole different endeavor when it's that complicated in somewhere like rural Newfoundland. So I kind of knew I was going home with it from the beginning. Like the story of the original Jane having to work this way because it was illegal actually still maps quite nicely onto present day rural communities, because it's not illegal, but it's just not accessible. And so, yeah, like I always knew I was like coming home with it, basically. And I specifically was thinking about Newfoundland, obviously, because that's like, I'm from there, it's my home. But, again, like I've had a lot of conversations with people in the last year. We could have mapped this out somewhere in many other parts of the country too, unfortunately. Yeah.
There's not even just like a lack of access. I think in a lot of rural parts of the country we call Canada, there's obstacles. Like there are actual like dangers that would prevent a woman from accessing abortion. Like if we think about young women and girls, there's that like not just the stigma attached to it in certain communities, but also like the reality of potentially having to tell your parents, and that's your ride. Your ride is there's no bus. You can't get to town like from the Great Northern Peninsula or Burgeo or Labrador City or what have you. And so, and there's also like the threats of domestic violence for a lot of women, unfortunately. And so some of these things I thought were handled really well in the book, and that like Martha and Ruth, even though they have a very complicated relationship that might not always veer toward the healthiest, they are aware of like the reality and the risk. And so there is that level of respect that was paid to the subject matter, that you handled it really well. Was this something that you were actively like practicing when you were putting the book together, or did it just like kind of organically happen through the exploration?
I mean, to me, like the ability, like the privacy and the lack of privacy always goes hand in hand with the idea of bodily autonomy for this. Like this needs to be accessible and frictionless, because we should have not just the right to bodily autonomy, but the right to our privacy. And privacy encompasses all of that. It protects people who are fearful of like their partner because they're in a domestic violence situation, or it protects a teenager who's scared, or anybody could be in this situation. I mean, and also just fundamentally, like you should be allowed to make these decisions privately. And the more friction there is, and the more complicated it is to access this, the less and less privacy you have. And that just, it's a question of dignity then too. It's like you should be able to conduct your life and make decisions for your body without having to go through this as if you're a child. It's like I feel very strongly about that. So that was always in the forefront when I was thinking about the situation in a rural place. It's not just about the mechanics of getting a ride. It's who are you asking, and what position does that put you in? So yeah, and I mean, the other thing is I kind of like at this point, there's not really any excuse for the fact that like we have the ability to make this easier and more private. This is not, in the book I have them, like Trish actually performs surgical abortions, and in part this is like a call to the original story, but like we've had medical abortions, like the pill, for years. There's no reason why we can't work toward it being the case that you can go to your pharmacy, and then maybe there is like a support network in your community, and that means somebody can come over to your house with you for the night, and that you can be in your home. I mean, that like we have the ability to do all of this. It's not it's actually not that far-fetched or that radical as a proposition. It's just a case of like a lot of misunderstanding, maybe a lack of like political will. I don't know.
And some violent misogyny.
Yeah.
With regards to holding women accountable for being sexual, right? Like, so there's that part of it. And unfortunately, there's a little thought given to how to comfort someone. There's little policy surrounding like how harm reduction. So a lot of the things that you're saying that are important to you, it's also something that would like lessen trauma. Like if you've had the privacy intact, then no further trauma would result from this experience, right? It would be like protecting the person. And so it's really unfortunate. Like it brought up a lot for me, like as a person from a very northern place, and being aware of how this happened in my community. Like we had lots of teenage mothers that I went to high school with. Not myself personally, I just became a mother like really late in life, but now I recognize, having just gone through a pregnancy, how it requires a lot of like physical and mental endurance. Like if people were explaining like the realities of like labor and childbirth and the detail that it would require, then I don't know that we would be like downplaying how much of a like procedure that we're undergoing, right? Like I had a C-section, and everyone was like, "Oh, that's get out next day and do your laundry." And I was like, "No, man, I'm not doing my laundry for weeks. Like, leave me alone." I suppose what I'm getting at here is, do you see any hope, or are you optimistic that this kind of like access will reach the rural regions of the country? Do you think that this is there's potential for this, or what would you how would we manifest this? How would we support this kind of initiative? Because like the book brings up a lot of things, and I'm left wondering how we can enact or encourage enactment in some of those, with respects to some of those issues.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like at once, it's really disheartening. It's really hard to watch what's happening now. It's hard to see like the misogynistic powers that be like take the reins back on all of these things. But at this, and then I do maintain some hope, simply because there are resources, there are tools, technology available to us in a different way than there ever was before, if we can manage to organize to use them in this way. But I mean, yeah, like the thing you come up against is the the misogyny, or even the light misogyny of people who say who hedge. Like you often hear people say well, I'm pro-choice, but it's not like I support like abortion on demand. And I always think what does that mean to you? Like you either are for bodily autonomy or you're not. Like you don't get, there's this moralizing and kind of squeamishness around the idea still that we might just get to make our own choices and you don't actually have any say in it. And so even if you're going to give it to us, maybe we don't have to do a little dance about it first and jump through all of your hoops, to prove that we deserved it. It's like that, those feel like the biggest hurdles that are left. Yeah.
There's also an expectation of grief and of damage that I found you handled quite well in the book. It was practical. It was almost pragmatic. These women were making the right choice for themselves and their family, and this was actually in some cases a positive thing. This was what they needed to be well, and that's not always what's depicted in popular culture. You see a lot of people being totally broken because they had an abortion, whereas Martha, they fall in love in as a result of the abortion. This care that occurs as a result of, or in tandem with this situation that they find themselves in, kind of blends itself to their relationship, right? And so I thought that was great. I was pleased to see this counter narrative where the woman is well rather than haunted for the rest of their lives. And I'm actually, I find it a little bit tiresome at this point in our socioeconomic development to hear the narrative whereby the woman is never the same, or she's changed. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, that was super deliberate on my part. That I was also very tired of seeing the same narratives of, the abortion is the climactic event, as if it's the climactic event of somebody's life, when really for a lot of people, maybe it wasn't the easiest day of their life, but it's just one thread in hopefully a long life that is full of many other events. And, if you're lucky, you can access this in a way that doesn't cause you lasting trauma on top of the situation itself. And it allowed you to do what you wanted to do. It allowed you to make the choice that you wanted to make. And so that was very important to me. I wanted it to be not so far as casual or it was a daily thing, but just to strip away some of this kind of heavy drama that it's almost like we need to see somebody suffer if we're going to give it to them.
Yeah.
And that's very tiresome and retrograde.
We want them to be scarred.
Yeah.
We want them to be forever scarred, rather than seeing it as something that potentially could be empowering for some people.
Yeah.
We want them to never forget the privilege that we've bestowed upon them, and that privilege is the same body autonomy that men have been exercising for centuries, right? And so
Right.
I was really like not just intrigued, but like pleased to see this in a novel. I was also I'm going to start taking questions from the audience, and so I'm going to open it up to them. But before we get to that, or maybe as a lead into that, I also like loved like when she gets drunk on the ferry, because that felt like, so I was like, yeah, getting drunk with the boys on the ferry, like this is a going home story as well,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you captured it so well. And so there is, while we're talking about all of these things that can seem very like heavy and serious, and like we're talking about like complicated friendships and abortion rights and things like this, you also have a very like interesting kind of sense of humor, like the way you observe and depict the characters in the action was wonderful.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. I also really like that ferry scene. I mean, I wanted there to be some humor in it. I mean, that I think that situation of like the going home story is like, I mean, it's ripe with like, there's so much there that's so funny if you dig into it. So yeah, I wanted to have a little fun with it.
There's also this like it not necessarily that she wasn't impressed by them, but like she recognizes them on the boat, like they recognize each other.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of inside outside stuff happening in the book. And so there's that moment where on the boat they recognize her for who she is, and she recognizes them, and they seem to they bridge it, right? Like this breach is not so much that we can't get drunk together on this ferry boat tonight in the middle of the North Atlantic. And I thought that was like really kind of, I mean, heartwarming for someone who has gotten drunk on lots of ferry boats many times as a part of living on an island. I think we're going to take some questions here. The first question that we have is from Simone, and Simone says, I noticed that you call Martha Martha. Why? Maybe I'm pronouncing this incorrectly. Why? Can you answer that, or can you speak to that?
Why is it about the pronunciation? Oh, I see. Like as in, why am I not hitting the hard T? I've actually just met people who spell their name Martha like that, and I don't know why, but it was in my head. So I spelled her name like that in the book, and I've always pronounced it that way. But I know that does lead to confusion for some people, and it's not the proper maybe pronunciation for that spelling.
Is it Marta? Is it like you're supposed
Yeah,
to
I
hit
think
the
you would hit like a
T?
harder T. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I guess it didn't even occur to me because we both know the same Martha that spells her name like that.
Yeah.
And maybe because lots of people spell their names in various forms in Newfoundland and don't pronounce them that way at all. It just seems like totally natural or not even of any consequence to us. Is there, have you encountered that throughout your life? People asking you about the spelling of your name or questioning that? Like, was that a little bit of like, are you being tongue in cheek and self-referential there?
A little bit, maybe. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because I have a name like that too. Yeah. I don't pronounce it the way it's in the French way. I don't use the accent aigu. And I live in Montreal where people are constantly asking like what or they just take their own pronunciation with it, which kind of works actually. So yeah, so I was having a little fun with that too, maybe.
There's this great like moment between Ruth and Martha, and I do believe she's even still Jane at this point. And so we're doing a lot of playing with names or identity right here in the part 1 section of the book. And I believe Ruth Jane Ruth asks her something to the effect of, did you do that?
Yeah.
And she's almost like caught out, like she's unsure of whether that's a good thing or a bad thing even.
Yeah.
And so this is one of those incidents where like Ruth's so forward, right? Like
Mhm.
I guess we all know people like that, but it's almost like I felt like there are a lot of tests
Yeah.
that are being like it's almost provocative the way she speaks to
Yeah.
Martha,
Yeah.
and there's a lack of boundaries there. And so, do you have any like thoughts on what boundaries mean in a story like this when you're talking about like friendship and like moving home and abortion? Like all these things feel very closely related. Even the language that we're using is all in the same kind of general like circle, like family related, like
Yeah. Yeah, like that. I mean, I thought about the way, like, when Ruth comes on so strong with these kind of tests, like the lighting in your apartment, like it's kind of arbitrary
yeah.
stuff too. It's little things. I don't like the lamps in your apartment. Did you change your name to spell it like that? And they're like these little things that if Martha was having a little bit more like self-assuredness, she would react differently, but she's kind of scrambling to like give the right answer, scrambling to like kind of almost like mold herself then into like what she feels she's expected to be. Which, she kind of like does writ large a little bit in the book too, beyond just like her clothes and her lamps. And yeah, it's kind
She
of
almost
like,
she wants desperately to get or receive Ruth's approval, right? Like she
yeah,
wants so
yeah,
desperately for this person to think she's cool in the same way that she feels Ruth is cool. If cool is even a word that people use in a positive sense anymore, I don't know. My point is, this makes her even more vulnerable in a way because she is so intent on being included or for lack of a better word to not fail or be rejected by Ruth. And I guess when I think about where she's at in her life, it really like almost like breaks my heart because she's kind of estranged from a lot of her other connections. Like she doesn't even call on her people. Like she's like, I'm
yeah,
not going to talk to
yeah,
anybody when I go home. I'm just going to sneak, which is a laugh and a half because no one can sneak into Newfoundland and not be found out. Like
yeah.
when I got to that part, I was like, oh, Martha, you can't go home and not have people know.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, the
we have
least realistic bit of the book maybe is that like she doesn't get a phone call a week later being like, somebody's mom saw you on the ferry. Are you at home?
Oh, I don't even know. Like, I was like, she seems like she's there for a while and no one knows. I don't know if I would be able to like get out of Port aux Basques before like all my cousins would be made aware. Like, it's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
not really a thing. I was like, what bay town are they sneaking into where no one's gonna tell on her? Like, this place is fictional. Like, that does not really exist. Um, but it was like I know like it allowed for like all this discovery in the book and like her to have this opportunity when she wanted to reach out and go to
Mhm.
town and like get on the go, which I also really quite enjoyed that aspect of the book where she's like, nah, I'm gonna go break bad for the weekend a little
Yeah,
bit, and then I'm
yeah.
gonna go back to my like advocacy project after I have a night out. We do have a question here that I'd like to get to, considering I asked everybody to like send me their questions. Now I'm just like talking. Um, the scenes in Montreal are vividly realized, and more broadly, there seems to be a significant literary trajectory, exile, question mark, of Newfoundland writers to Montreal at particular points in their career. This is really like pertinent considering that it's you and I. But Martha is unable to find real community there. Is Montreal hospitable or only partially so? And what were you seeking to do in the contrast between rural Newfoundland and urban Quebec? Great question.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Okay, there's so many parts to that. Let me back up to the beginning. Yeah, I mean, what do you think? Do we have an answer for why we all end up coming back and forth between home and Newfoundland or home
I
and
mean,
Montreal?
I can speak to why I always preferred Montreal to other Canadian cities, because I also have been back and forth between St. John, Newfoundland and Montreal. And I guess I never felt like anyone was fetishizing my heritage when I was in that particular city, because everybody had their own identity. And
Yeah.
so no one tried to absorb me. Like I wasn't a party trick. I was just
Right.
another person at the party. Whereas there have been occasions where I'd been in other Anglophone Canadian cities, and it became like this, there was an expectation of behavior because of
Mhm.
like the reputation of Newfoundlanders, whereas Montrealers didn't care like at
Yeah.
all. Like I was
Yeah.
like, oh, you're a Newfoundlander and you're a Labradorian, and this person's Portuguese and that person's Russian and this person's Iranian, and like it was just like never something that was of any note. And so if you want to have an anonymous kind of experience where you are a part of something because everyone's a part of that same something, because no one exactly belongs at the party. Does this
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah, that's like I that's absolutely the way that I used to think about it, that it wasn't like just like a different perspective here or something, that it's like, you know, there's because of the languages, because of the fact that just most people are from elsewhere, it's yeah, it creates a different dynamic. And then
Is Montreal
is Montreal hospitable? I mean,
Oh, putting you on the spot.
uh, I don't think it's inhospitable, but I think it's not easy either. But it's not easy anywhere to like start from scratch and make a community, especially when you're from a small place where you don't have to like the path to doing that is different. Like it's not so many strangers, there's like you kind of know of things even if you're not directly. Sorry, my cat is making herself known here. Yeah, so like, when I was thinking about Martha feeling kind of like drifting around like that, I had definitely moments like that when I first was here, and you haven't put any roots down, and you're always going to be a little bit on the outside as like an Anglophone from somewhere else. It is harder to like work your way into the fabric of something. So yeah, but I mean, I don't think it's inhospitable. It's just, sometimes a city catches you at a certain moment in your life, and you're lost there. But, that's not necessarily Montreal's fault.
No, certainly. I mean, I don't think it's so much that Montreal plays as powerful a role in why people stay or return to Newfoundland. If we're talking about Newfoundland writers specifically, I think we have to like pay respect or acknowledge that it's the island that draws you back in, like, and not just like your friends and family members, even though they play like a large part in that, like that sense of belonging, but like this like ecological attachment that we have to the island of Newfoundland. And that like not reverence, because we're very irreverent about it, but like I found myself like I physically like yearned for home. And I suppose when I say home, I mean the Great Northern Peninsula specifically. And so when I was in Montreal, I felt very much like, well, this is two places removed from where
Right.
I belong. Like I've already moved from home once.
Right.
And so I do think it is a city that like allows you to come and go. It allows you to
Yeah.
navigate that relationship. And so in a lot of ways, Montreal is respectful of people's autonomy. Like Montreal allows you to come on your own terms and leave and return. And like, there's not like that. I never felt like people were ever going to judge me because I had gone home or lived somewhere else and then returned. Like there wasn't the same kind of judgment. Like I didn't
Yeah.
feel like there was judgment. It was just like, oh, she's back. Oh, she's gone. Oh,
Yeah.
she's back. Like,
Yeah. And it's
um,
failure that you left. You didn't left because you couldn't. It wasn't like, it's less a leaving here and more a going home.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's less about the like getting out of here. It's more the pull than it is Montreal pushing you out.
And one is a positive framing and the other one is a negative framing,
Yeah.
right? And so like I never thought of it as not being able to hack it in the big city of Montreal. It was more like the last time I came home, it was the pandemic had just broken, or like just it was just happening. And the head of my PhD program said, I think maybe you should go home. And my husband, then boyfriend, and I, we're taking refuge in home when like things were uncertain.
Yeah.
Yvonne says that I found the writing style very interesting. Can you explain?
Yeah.
You
I
want to
mean,
talk about your development of voice or what you think your writing style exhibits specifically? Like what kind of like skills or like tricks of the trade you tend to lean upon? I could start talking about what I think your skills are, but I think you should do it first.
Yeah, okay. I don't, it's so like it's a broad thing. I mean, a lot of people have definitely responded to the no quotation marks. I don't know if that's maybe what part of the question is about. And that's something I've done for a long time. Probably because I ripped it off of like Lisa Moore when I was like 21 and was like, I'm never going back. Like I love that. I love the speed of that. I love the cleanness of it. I love that you need to be kind of sharp with the dialogue so that it distinguishes itself from the narrative, but also that sometimes you can have a little ambiguity, you can slide into it. So that choice to not mark the dialogue in a more like traditional way is on the one hand deliberate, but on the other hand like kind of so much a part of my style by now that I didn't even sit down and think for this book I'm going to do this. Yeah, I mean, I think like probably, you know, some of my influences are pretty like clear, I think, like to you at least, Megan, but yeah, I don't know what else I could zero in on there.
But I think this like I also exhibit similar like approaches to dialogue, and stylistically I have absolutely no time for punctuation, which certainly can be infuriating for people who are strong adherers to the Queen's English. But I think it says more about our relationship to language. Like Newfoundlanders don't really have the same not just relationship, but we don't have the same commitment to the Queen's English or appropriate or proper conjugations. And so it doesn't feel far-fetched in any way to manipulate the language in order to accelerate the scene or make it look tidy on the page. Like this is something that and so with regards to like it being clean, which I think is the word that you use, if you're about to like write something very messy, sometimes I feel, and I think Lisa does similar things, when it looks clean, it helps. Like there's this barrier that like you can kind of move through because it has a visual representation that feels like something you can weld or like manipulate, mold.
Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, like I cite Lisa, and like your work also has the same, some of these same touchstones, but like we really came out of like a tradition of this at home. Like I felt very empowered from the beginning to play around with this as much as I want because of the writers I was reading and coming up with, which is really, it's a beautiful thing. It's like, that's why I remain so interested in what everybody else is doing at home, that playfulness. It's fun. I guess we're probably getting up to time, aren't we?
Yeah, Daphne is signaling to us that she's returned. And so I'm going to turn it over to Daphne.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Aimee. Thank you so much, Megan. It was just a thrilling hour. Such amazing insights into the characters in your book and fabulous questions. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us this evening. I hope you enjoyed hearing from these two fascinating women as much as I did. If you do know anybody who missed it, this interview will be available on our YouTube channel over the next couple of days. And please be sure to join us on June 27th for our final book club, which will feature Michael Christie interviewing his actual real-time partner, Cedar Bowers, who is the author of Astra, which was longlisted for the 2021 Scotiabank Giller Prize. If you've already subscribed to our book club mailing list, you will be sent a registration notification. If you haven't, then just visit our website for more information. Good night to you, Aimee in Montreal, and to you, Megan, out in Newfoundland. And it's what was so interesting for me just before I say goodnight was to hear you too talk about your home that way and how it has nurtured you and nourished you. So thank you so much.
It's also made us tough.
Good night.
Good night.